us. We are very excited to have you all here today. This is the first session of the Beyond the Beach series being presented to you by NSE's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I am Rina Tagalikod from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And we are excited to bring these series to you to introduce to you the colonial histories and unique cultures of the 4 island destinations in NSE, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Guam, and the US Virgin Islands. And so we're lucky to have Dr. Concepcion here today. And so we're gonna have actually Luis start us off.
Thank you, Raina. Before introducing Francisco, please note that you can use the chat to write down your questions. I will be moderating the Q&A session after the presentation. And then let me introduce Dr. Francisco Concepcion, received a doctorate degree in pastoral theology from the Inter-American University of Puerto Rico and a doctorate in history of Puerto Rico and the Caribbean from the Center for Advanced Studies located in San Juan. He studied law at the University of Puerto Rico and obtained a master's degree in international legal studies from the Washington College of Law in Washington, D.C. He is currently a professor of criminal justice at the Barranquitas campus of the Inter-American University of Puerto Rico and teaches a course on international law at the Center for Advanced Studies. He has worked as an immigration attorney since 2002. His academic interests range from religion, theology, international law, immigration, and decolonial theory. He is a recurrent invited collaborator at El Nuevo Dia, the main local newspaper in Puerto Rico, where he recently expressed his views on the Ukrainian war, conflict, and the international law. Definitely, we look forward on Francisco's updated analysis of Puerto Rico Beyond the Beach for all of NSE students and coordinators. Please welcome Francisco.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you, everybody. I'm honored for this invitation and the opportunity to talk to you about Puerto Rico. And I think that recently it has become my main duty to explain Puerto Rico to a lot of people in many places. And the university sent me to the television to teach a course on the history of Puerto Rico. So everybody knows my face now. Every time I go to the supermarket or something like that, they tell me something about the class. So I'm going to share my screen with you to have the presentation. Okay. So let's talk about Puerto Rico. Let me tell you that I love this the title of the webinars, no, of the conversations, because yes, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Virgin Island, Guam is more than a beach, no, and we have to get away from that idea of the paradise. One of the questions that I'm working with in this presentation is that idea of what else is in the island beside the paradise. Well, the first answer is that there is no paradise. There is a reality of people trying to live, trying to work, and when the students come to the island, they have to know that this is not a place that is only dedicated for tourism. No, it's something else. So I think that is one of the issues that we have to talk about when we talk about the islands. As you know, the session will explore the colonial history and unique culture of Puerto Rico. And the topics is what is the unique history of Puerto Rico. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. What is the culture like? In Puerto Rico, we have to be very aware that culture is very important. No, the majority of the people that lives in Puerto Rico lives in a national identity very different from the national identity in the United States. It doesn't matter if they favor annexation, if they favor independence if they favor the Commonwealth. Everybody share the same the same identity, and they try, and we try to protect that identity. So you are going to find in Puerto Rico a lot of people that are going to articulate an idea, a discourse, speech that is a nationalist speech, but it's not a nationalism that wants to exterminate everybody else. No, it's a defensive nationalism. So that is very important also. What can students expect? Difference between the island and the mainland. There are a lot of differences. There are a lot of coincidences. There are a lot of things that are the same here in Puerto Rico as in the US, but we have also a lot of differences. What are the important things a visiting exchange student should know beyond the idea of paradise? Well, the first is that there is no paradise, and I'm going to explain that later. And what should the coordinators know to best advise students? We are going to talk about that also. Okay, what is the unique history of Puerto Rico? Basically, we entered the history of the United States in 1898. The United States entered the Cuban-Spanish War in 1898. They came to do the propaganda was that Spain was killing the Cubans, so they were coming to save the Cuban. And when they entered the war, they defeated Spain, and as a consequence, they ended up with Puerto Rico, with Cuba, and the Philippines in their hands. So the United States entered, became an empire, became an extra continental empire in relation to us in 1898. And this is this photo, this image that you are seeing is an image from the newspapers of the era, no? In 1899, 1900, the newspaper were publishing this kind of representation. And if you see Philippines, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Cuba, all of them are here, sitting as savages in the front of the room because they have to be educated. That is the idea that was in the policy of the U.S. and the policy that the U.S. developed towards those islands. This is another representation of the era, and this is from 1900. And if you see, the Puerto Ricans were seen as the best fit to become Americans, no? And actually, we are the only ones that ended up being Americans as a citizens. Puerto Ricans became citizens of the U.S. in 1917. Cuba got their independence in 1910. The Philippines were fighting for independence. Like they got it like around 1945, something like that, at the end of the Second World War. And Puerto Ricans have been dealing with this conflict. What we are we Puerto Ricans? Are we Latinos? Are we Americans? Are we U.S. citizens? And probably the answer is that we are all of those at the same time. And that is very confusing for many people, including people that are not from the island, no? That people that come from other places of the U.S. and begin to relate to the history, the culture, the identity of Puerto Ricans. That confusion is going to be all the time presented in the middle of the relationship between you and me. No? And I'm not saying this in a manner of saying that it's a basis of conflict. No, it's a basis of trying to understand, trying to extend an idea of who these people are, who we are, and how we are supposed to be relating to each other. That is why at the beginning, when I began in NSE, I remember, I don't think that you use it anymore, but I remember that the organization used the word territories. And the word territory, at least for Puerto Ricans, is very insulting. No? It's very insulting. If you say that Puerto Rico is a territory of the U.S., what you are saying is that Puerto Rico is a property of the US, and that can be translated as Puerto Ricans are a property of the US. That is why that word was so conflicting for me when I began to work with the NSE. And I know that the organization made some changes to eliminate that word, because the word was a legacy of this era, no, of this moment in history. And this is the representation of the US in 1898. If you can see the islands, no, is Philippines here, Hawaii, that enter in the realm of the United States, also not as a consequence of the war, but another process, but because of another process, enter in the realm of the United States, and Puerto Rico and Cuba also enter in that context. So the idea of territory, I referred to that before, is a legacy of the Supreme Court insular cases. This was the question that the Supreme Court was trying to answer between 1901 and 1922. A couple of some cases that arrived to the Supreme Court, and the basic question was, who are these people in relation to the United States? So what is the relationship between the United States and these islands? What is the relationship between the United States and the people that are living in that island? One of my professors in school law, in the school of law, Efren Rivera, wrote a wonderful book in English that is called The Legal Construction of Identity. And he says that the Supreme Court of the US in the insular cases, what they did was that they created a legal identity for Puerto Ricans. Who are they? Well, they are a property of the US. That is the word of territory. That is the word territory. That is the meaning of the word territory. They are a property of the US. Actually, the Supreme Court said that we belong to, but are not part of, the United States. And that law, established by the Supreme Court in the beginning of the 20th century, is still the law that regulates the relation between Puerto Rico and the US. We belong to the US, to the United States, but we are not part of the US. And that means that all the rights that you have in the Constitution does not apply automatically to the territory, to Puerto Rico, to the people in Puerto Rico. It doesn't mean if you are a US citizen, all the rights that are recognized in the Constitution do not apply to the citizens that live in Puerto Rico, because their condition in front of the Constitution changes if they are living in the island or if they are living in New York City, for example, no, or in Florida now that the majority of our population is living in Florida. Another thing that is very important about the Supreme Court insular cases is that this was the same court, and I mean by saying that that is the same court, is that it was the same composition of the court that decided the case Plessy versus Ferguson. And if you remember your US history class, you remember that Plessy versus Ferguson, what that case related to the trains in Louisiana, that decided that you can have different services, separate services for Black people and white people, but they have to be equal, and they established the principle of separate but equal. That same court, the same court that resolved the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, is the court that decided the insular cases and decided that Puerto Rico was not going to be ever a state of the US, because Puerto Rico was composed by people of another identity, of another culture, of another, and that were unable to govern themselves. That is what the Supreme Court also said in those cases. I have a couple of quotes here. Those Downs versus Bidwell was resolved in 1901. And he says, if those positions are inhabited by alien races differing from us in religion, custom, laws, method of taxation, and modes of thought, the administration of government and justice according to Anglo-Saxon principle may for a time be impossible. And that meant in that moment that because Puerto Ricans belong to another culture, another identity, another traditions, they were unable to govern themselves. That is why they decided to transform Puerto Rico in a territory that was not incorporated and that was not destined to be a state. And also they say we are therefore of opinion that the island of Puerto Rico and Puerto Rico, they used to call Puerto Rico. That was the name they used during that time. Until 1948, they called Puerto Rico that way. It's a territory, a pyramid, and belonging to the U.S., but not a part of the U.S. No, that is what I said before. And that continues being like that. Okay? Also, they say that the power to acquire territory by treaty implies not only the power to govern the territory, but to prescribe upon that what term the U.S. will receive its inhabitants. That means that because they govern the territory, they can decide how they are going to govern that territory. There seems to be no middle ground between this position and the doctrine that if their inhabitants do not become immediately upon annexation citizens of the U.S., their children thereafter born, whether savages or civilized, are such and entitled to all the rights. That is also another conclusion of the court in that moment. Remember that this is in 1901. Puerto Ricans do not become U.S. citizens until 1917. And it is doubtful if Congress will ever assert to the annexation of territory upon the condition that inhabitants, however foreign they may be to our habits, traditions, and modes of life, should become at once citizens of the U.S. No, that is they had the same debate. The only issue is that we continue with the debate. They resolved the debate in the insular cases, but we continue the rest of our history until today debating the same issue, what we are and what we want to be in relation to the U.S. And this is very important because, and Luis is saying yes, because we are living this every day, no? The majority of our decisions are made in reference to these problems. The majority of the construction of our identity is made in relation to the issue of what is going to be the future relation between Puerto Rico and the U.S. And if you are an independentista, you like some kind of music, you like some kind of readings, you like some kind of way of dressing, etc., etc. And if you are an estadista, a person that wants the annexation of Puerto Rico to the U.S., you are going to behave in another way, etc., etc., etc. So this is very important. The U.S. resolved through the insular cases in 1901 through 1922 what was the relation of Puerto Rico with them, but Puerto Ricans still debate the same issue today. Okay, so that is the first question. What is the history? And I made reference to the history of the U.S. with Puerto Rico. Why? Because before we were a colony of Spain, a Spanish colony, between 1493 and 1898, we were part of the Kingdom of Spain. And actually, at the end, in 1897, the crown, the government of Spain approved what was called a condition of autonomy for Puerto Ricans. It lasted for 6 months or something like that, and then they entered the war with the United States, and we changed the empire. No, the U.S. entered the island, but this is I make reference, I sign to the history of Puerto Rico with the US because that is going to be the basis of what we are today, okay? And the culture. So this is a very interesting question. I think that the majority of the people, when they talk about culture, what we are talking about is food, is religion, is music, is beliefs, traditions, etc., etc., etc. So I'm going to make some reference to that, but also I'm going to make some reference to the political culture, but because it's very different. It's very different. Indeed, here you are going to identify a very basic difference between the US and Puerto Rico, and actually is very different in Puerto Rico, the political culture, compared to Hawaii or Guam or the Virgin Islands also. Right? The first thing is that we don't have Republicans and Democrats. I mean, yeah, there are some people that call themselves Democrats. There are some people that call themselves Republicans, but our political parties are organized around the problem of what is going to be the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States. So we have the PNPs. PNPs is how we call the party that is in favor of annexation. Is the in Spanish is the Partido Nuevo Progresista or New Progressive Party. And they use the blue as their color for the elections. No relation with the color of the Democrats. We have also the Populares, is the red one, is the Partido Popular Democrático or Democratic Popular Party. That was the party that established the relationship we have with the US right now in 1952, and that is the Commonwealth. That is the party that established that relationship, and we have the Pipiolos. Pipiolos is the Partido Independentista Puertorriqueño or the Independence, the Puerto Rican Independence Party, no? The party of the independence of Puerto Rico. And all the parties are organized around what is their preference towards the relationship between the US and Puerto Rico. No? There is no, we don't really have liberals and conservatives. We have people that want annexation, and you have some conservatives there, and you have some liberals there. We have people that want to keep the relation as it is today, the Commonwealth, and we have some conservatives there, and we have some liberal there, and we have some people that want independence, and we have conservative and we have liberal also there. No, they live together, because the basic idea is what is going to be the relation between the island and the US. The first one is Partido No Progresista. They propose what they call in English, in Spanish, Estadidad Jíbara. That is this is part of an article from 1970 in the New York Times, and it says that Estadidad Jíbara, that is the basic proposal, or was the proposal of the New Progressive Party. That is the party that wants annexation. Could be called hillbilly statehood, something like that. I'm not sure if that is a good translation, but that is the way they call it in that time. And basically, this party, the only thing that is proposing is that we have to become a state of the US, and we have to become the 51st state of the US. Obviously, they have to talk with Washington, D.C., that also wants to be the 51st state of the US. So there is a conflict also here. Why Puerto Rico has not become a state? at the beginning is because Puerto Ricans did not vote in favor of annexation, no? In 1967, etc. They decided to vote in favor of Commonwealth. We never had in 1952 the alternative to become a state. The only alternative was to stay as a colony or to become a Commonwealth, free associated state, or whatever you want to call it. That is the relation we have now. In reality, we never had the opportunity to vote for statehood. In the 90s, we have a couple of referendums and voted in favor of statehood a couple of years ago. But for statehood to be approved doesn't require only that Puerto Ricans ask for it. And if you follow the case of Washington, D.C., you know that is in Washington, D.C., statehood wins the referendum by 90% or something like that. And if Congress does not approve the annexation, it's not going to happen. No? And the problem is that the annexation of Puerto Rico or the annexation of Washington, D.C. is going to change the balance of power between Republicans and Democrats in Congress, and that is the reason why it has not been approved by Congress. The second one is the Popular Democratic Party. They want what we have right now. The Commonwealth is the name in English. The name in Spanish is Estado Libre Asociado. If you translate that, it's going to be the Free Associated State. And actually, that Free Associated State was in reality a reference to the Free Associated State of Ireland in 1922. In 1922, Ireland established a Free Associated State relationship with Britain in 1922. So this party saw that model and proposed in the 50s this alternative. It was approved by Congress, and we become the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. They say here in Spanish, it says, sigue siendo lo mejor de los mundos. It continues to be the best of two words, no? Independence, and we have the best of independence, and we have the best of annexation. That is what they say, no? And the last one is Independencia. This is the smallest group in Puerto Rico. Basically, when you have referendum, etc., independence get like 5-7% of the vote. The majority of the people doesn't want independence. I can understand that. No, I can understand why people are not going to vote for that. But it's one of the main ideologies, not ideology, of the main choices when we talk about politics in Puerto Rico. So while there are no Republicans or Democrats in Puerto Rico, I said before there are some, no, but very little. Whatever they say in the U.S. doesn't have any effect here. Our organization are going to continue to be based on the relation between the Puerto Rico and the U.S. and not because we are conservative or liberal or something like that. Okay. The Puerto Ricans who live in the island do not vote in presidential elections. That is true. Our president is the president of the U.S. So right now our president is Joseph Biden, but we don't vote for him. We don't participate in the elections. And why? The reason is because the U.S. Constitution establishes that who decides who is the president are the states. Not the people, actually. No, if you go to the Constitution and look for it, you're going to see that actually the people are not the one that have the right to elect the president, are the states. But the state gave their citizens the authority or the power to decide who the president is going to be. And because Puerto Rico is not a state, it cannot vote for the president. Why the people from Washington, D.C. can do it? Because the people from Washington, D.C. got a constitutional amendment that gave them the right to vote for the president. Notwithstanding, they don't have representation in Congress. They have the same representation that we have. That is a resident commissioner that doesn't have vote and has a voice. Right? Okay, so these are the political parties right now. The blue one is the pro-annexation party. The red one is the party that is in favor of the Commonwealth. The green one is the party that is in favor of independence. So if you want to identify with one of those, put a shirt, a red shirt, or a blue shirt, or a green shirt. And they are going to, oh, you belong to this party or the other party. And now we have two other parties that are not organized around the issue of the status. A conservative party, Proyecto Dignidad, is a very small party, but it has some power. And actually, right now they have basically the control of the Senate in Puerto Rico, because their senator was the one that gave her vote for the election of the president of the Senate. And Victoria Ciudadana, that is a left-wing party, a liberal party that was also got a couple of votes in the last election. Not a couple of votes, a lot of votes, actually. These are the results of the last elections. This one is when it says Ricardo Rosselló Nevares was in 2016. Ricardo Rosselló was the governor that had to present that renounces or quit the position because the protest in the summer of 2019. And in 2020, the election, these are the results of the election. And if you look to the results of Alexandra Lúgaro here, that is the third one in 2016, and she is the third one in 2020. Look the difference in the numbers. And if you go to the person from the pro-independence party, in 2016, Maria de Lourdes Santiago got 20,000 votes. In 2020, Juan Dalmau Ramírez got 174,402 votes, 1,000 votes. No, so the difference is something extraordinary. Something happened between the 2016 and 2020 election, and what happened was the summer of 2019. Okay. But we participate in the presidential primaries, yeah. And last primary was the Democrats only. The Republicans did not have a primary in 2020, and you can see how many people voted in that primary: 6,302 people. In a population of more than 3 million, only 6,000 people voted in the primary, because it doesn't matter, it doesn't have any impact in our lives. What is the religious composition of Puerto Rico? The majority of Puerto Ricans are Roman Catholics. It doesn't matter if they don't go to church, they are going to call themselves Roman Catholic. 27% is going to be Protestant, but I say, as a Lutheran, I am a Lutheran, because but as a Lutheran, I will say that the majority of the Protestants in Puerto Rico are Roman Catholic also. No, we have a Roman Catholic Protestantism, and we have the same celebration, and we have the same language, and we honor the same saints, etc., etc., etc. Other Christians are 1.9, other religions 1.4, and people that do not identify with any religion is 1.9%. Other festival, arts, music, sports, you can see a couple of representation here. You can see the classical literature in Puerto Rico. We have a lot of people writing novels and short stories and poems and essays and everything, no? In the island since the 19th century. When the US arrived to Puerto Rico, we already had established literature. Sports is always very important for us. Here you have Roberto Clemente, that was a Puerto Rican from Carolina, and he was very honored in Puerto Rico, respected. At the beginning of the conference of the meeting, you saw toque de bomba, no? It was a bomba music. It's a music from the north of the island, basically from Carolina or Loíza, and it was a music played by the slaves during slavery. And now the majority of the Afro-Puerto Rican communities has that legacy. You have a representation of Francisco Yer here. This is a how do you call it? Cuadro?
A painting?
Yeah, a painting from Francisco Yer in the 19th century. It's called El Velorio. They are supposed to be, there is supposed to be in the table a little baby that is dead, and they are celebrating what is called in Spanish Baquiné. It was a celebration of the life of the child that died when he was a child, because he was to become an angel automatically. So, and you have all the representation in the middle. You have the people in the celebrations in Old San Juan, la fiesta de la calle San Sebastián. Everywhere you're going to see the Puerto Rican flag. We are going to use it for everything. I remember that when I used to live in Washington, D.C., I had a Puerto Rican flag in my car. And this policeman stopped me in the middle of Connecticut Avenue just to tell me that he was from Luquillo also, no? And he was very proud to see the flag, etc., etc. So you are going to see that if you receive Puerto Rican students, they are going to have a Puerto Rican flag anywhere. Somewhere they are going to have the Puerto Rican flag. Concerning language, Puerto Ricans understand, the majority of the people in Puerto Rico understand English. We can speak English, we don't like to do it. So if you come to Puerto Rico and you don't know Spanish, it's going to be very difficult for you to have a conversation, because they are going to understand you, but they are not going to be, not to be able, but they are not going to talk very fluently to you, or they are not going to respond to you. So sometimes we are going to respond to you in Spanish, or we are only going to smile. Puerto Ricans are not going to make fun of you if you try to speak Spanish and you don't do it right. The majority of the experience that I have with people of the US that come to Puerto Rico and they try to speak Spanish is that Puerto Ricans do not make fun of you. They don't laugh at you. We appreciate that, no? And we are going to do the best to have a good communication if we see that the person is trying to speak Spanish. The main language in Puerto Rico is Spanish. So don't assume that everywhere you can communicate in English, notwithstanding that they are going to understand you. Okay, what they can expect, the difference between the island and mainland. And Luis, let me know how much time do I have, because I don't have the clock.
You're good. Go ahead.
Okay.
You're good.
So the difference between the island, this is a very good representation. The difference, we cannot vote for president. We have our own Olympic team, international Olympic team. We don't participate in the Olympic team of the US, no? So sometimes you have events where Puerto Rico is going to play against the US, and we don't file federal income tax returns. We pay federal taxes, well, because we pay the social security, etc., but we don't pay the federal income taxes. Similarities is Puerto Rican. We use the US dollar, that is our currency. We have the same postal service, and we fly the American flag. Actually, everywhere that you are going to see that is a government building, we are going to have the Puerto Rican flag and the US flag. What should they know about Puerto Rico beyond the idea of paradise? The first thing is there is no paradise. No, we are not a hotel. We are not a beach. We are people trying to make it. No, so when tourists come to Puerto Rico and they behave everywhere as tourists, they become a problem for us. And they are going to have problem also with the people in Puerto Rico. If you are in a beach and that is in the hotel, you can behave as a tourist and there is no problem with that. But if you go to Bayamón, that is away from San Juan, and you behave as a tourist in a gas station, you are going to have some problem. No? So you have to know how to behave where and when to behave as a tourist. No. It's not acceptable in Puerto Rico to be walking around in the traje de baño, in beachwear. No, we are not. You are not supposed to be walking in the middle of the shopping center as if you were in the beach. No, that is not acceptable. And you are not supposed to be drinking in the street. You are not supposed to be doing a lot of things that usually you do as a tourist in every part of the island. And the other thing is that the people that come to Puerto Rico have to know that there is a climate disaster politics that has been implemented in the island. It's true. Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico in 2017, we still have people living with the blue, with the blue tents, no? Because they haven't received the money to reconstruct their houses, because the help has been very, very, very slow, and because there are other priorities for the people that control this process. No, there is nothing natural of Puerto Rico disaster. Naomi Klein published a book that is there. The Battle for Paradise is the book she published about what happened in Puerto Rico after Maria. And basically she talks about disaster capitalism, and she said long before Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico was a textbook example. Before those fierce winds came, the debt, illegitimate and much of it illegal, was the excuse used to run through a brutal program of economic suffering, etc., etc., etc. This is a representation of the time. You remember that Donald Trump was the president in 2017, and he came to Puerto Rico and said that we were asking for too much, and that was creating problems to the budget of the US. This is another issue that became very common during that time. The media began calling Puerto Rican fellow Americans, and we have to save. I remember that I was watching CNN, etc., 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 and all the time they were saying we have to save them because they are American citizens, and we have to save them because they are part of our country, etc., etc. Basically, no. And one of the intellectuals, Puerto Rican intellectuals in New York, wrote a piece that says why calling Puerto Rican fellow American is not a good idea, and it's not a good idea basically because it's an extension of the ideas established in the insular cases. No, the idea of inferiority, they press the idea of being property of, and the idea of they have to be safe only because they are Americans. If they were not American, we don't have any responsibility toward them. This is another mistake that you can do, you can make. In March 2nd, 2022, Biden said somewhere, he didn't say it in public actually. No, he said this to a group of people. Somebody heard that and make it public. And he said, if I were in Puerto Rico, I would vote for statehood. Yeah, well, it's something so obvious for us. Yeah, because you are not Puerto Ricans. If you are in Puerto Rico, you are not Puerto Rican. But there is something else, no? And what is problematic about this kind of expression is that it's better if you don't say that. It's better if you don't say anything about that. It's better if you don't assume a position about the status, because it's very sensitive, that issue in Puerto Rico. So there is a problem about the economy. You know that we are under Promesa right now. This is one of the basic explanation of Promesa. It established an oversight board that was named by the president and Congress, and that board has the authority to decide what the budget of the island is going to be. So we have a Senate and a House of Representatives. They approve a budget. The governor is going to sign that budget, but the board that is not elected by Puerto Ricans, that was named by Congress and the president, has the authority to decide if that budget is going to be the budget of the island, if they want to change that budget. So we are right now, today, in 2022, under that system, under that law. There are some expressions, public expressions. This is, you can see, if you go to Puerto Rico and you go to El Morro, you are going to see very close to El Morro in Old San Juan, this kind of graffitis in the public buildings. These are the protests, etc. What should coordinators know to best advise students? First, transportation. Get a car. If you are going to be living if you are going to Rio Piedra, for example, probably you can move around without a car. But if you are going to go to Barranquitas or San Germán or Ponce, etc., you need a car or something you can use to move around, because we don't have a national transportation system. We have a lot of roads, but we don't have the train that you see here. Only rides in the north, in the metropolitan zone between Bayamón and San Juan. You have these buses. They only ride around the metropolitan zone. Also, you have taxis. They can be very expensive, and usually you have a lot of what we call this el tapón. No, it's a lot of traffic. So you have to be very careful about that. If you are going to live outside San Juan, outside Rio Piedra, outside the metropolitan zone, the best recommendation is that you have to make sure that you have or somebody that can transport you around, or you have a car or something like that to move around the island. The food, almost most of our food is fried. That is the first thing that I'm going to say about food. Here you can see traditional food, the lechon, that is the pig. I don't know how to say that in English. El lechon, sweet plantains, el mofongo, las empanadillas, or empanadas, etc., or the other. Los pasteles, no? These are food that we usually eat during the Christmas time, but you can find them around the island all the time. Rice and beans is very common that we eat that also during the day. Yeah. And you can find And you can find also almost every fast food that you have in the state, you have it in Puerto Rico. So, okay. So family, do you remember Everybody Loves Raymond? And do you remember that comedy? I love that comedy actually. And the mother usually was all the time in the house of the son and getting with all the problems and all the time pressing everybody, etc. So Puerto Rican families, most of Puerto Rican families are like that. No, we live very close to our mothers and our fathers. If we don't live very close to them, we visit them very often. The majority of our students that study very close to their houses live with their parents. And probably if you receive a student from Puerto Rico, probably that is the first time that that student is going to be away from his family. And the family is very important, no? Or you love it or you hate it, it's going to be there. They are going to be there and they are present all the time. So if you have experience with Puerto Rican students, you are going to see that probably the mother is going to call you. I received calls from mothers to tell me something about the son. And I said, no, I can't tell you anything about your son. He has to come to talk to me, not you. But they are going to do that. Eh? And race, these are photos from my album, from my personal album. This is the first one is my uncle. He lives in Germany, and you can see he's black. In the middle, they are my friends when I was 18 years old, and I have an Ivan that was a friend that was black. Actually, and the other one is my cousin, Giselle. She lives in Florida right now, and she is also black. And the funny thing about race in Puerto Rico is that there is racism. I'm not saying that we don't have racism. Yeah, we have. But it was not visible. No, I remember when I was a child, etc. Giselle, my cousin, was not black. I didn't make that kind of difference during that time, no? And the majority of Puerto Ricans live in that kind of environment. So when we move to the US, it's very impacting. It's very confrontational for us to see the divisions of races, etc., because although we have some kind of racism that is as bad as it's not the same kind. No? We never had a legal, at least in the 20th century, a legal structure that said that black people has to be in some place and white people has to be in other places. And the majority of our families are like this, are very diverse, are very, we have people from different colors, from different races, etc. And it was not very common to see an explicit discrimination act. But said that, yes, we have problems with racism. I remember when I was a young, they used to say in Spanish, mejorar la raza, no? Y mejorar la raza was, do not get married with a person that is black because your race is going to go down. You have to go up, and if you want to go up, you have to marry somebody that is white, that is blonde, that has blue eyes, etc. No? But that kind of vision was more seen as a joke, more than as a policy. Right?
Francisco, we have just 5 minutes. We should be wrapping up so we can have probably some questions or comments from the audience.
Yes. No, actually, that was the end. I have this Hijos del Cañaveral. It's a video. If you want, at the end, we can project that. But I'm done.
Okay. Well, Francisco, thanks very much for your presentation. I think if anyone has a direct question to Francisco, just open your mic and let's make the most of the next 5 minutes. Anyone? Any volunteer? I have some questions. I have some comments here regarding giving you thanks for the sharing your information. And actually, I just want to make a comment. Uh, it is nice that we, after probably 3 or 4 years, that we made a presentation on Puerto Rico it was a New Orleans conference. It's good to go over these things because coordinators still want to know more, and they keep asking questions. And actually, the students are really they learn about all of these things with their fellow students in Puerto Rico, and I think it's a good idea that we once in a while bring this information to the NSE community. Any other comments? Okay. I have some comments, Francisco, you may check in the chat box. Well, if you want to say just a final comment, Francisco, to close up, you're welcome. Raina.
Yeah, I would like only to share with you this video.
Go ahead.
It's a song by René Pérez. Probably you know him from Calle 13, and he made this one after Maria. So I'm gonna play only part of the video. Let me know if you can hear it well.
Francisco, we can't hear any audio. When you share your screen, there's a button towards the bottom that also invites you to share your sound along with your screen. Make sure you click that.
Yeah, let me see.
Raina, while Francisco, you may want to make a comment while Francisco is checking the information.
Yes, well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much, Francisco. This was extremely valuable and fascinating to learn more about the island. I noticed in earlier slides that Puerto, excuse me, I'm mispronouncing it, was spelled Porto. And you had mentioned that in 1948 or so that it was then changed to how it's currently spelled. So I was just curious what had happened and why had it changed?
You know that the reason was that the people from the US were unable to pronounce Puerto, so they call it Porto. That is a port. In English, Puerto is port, so they call it Porto. And they made the mistake at the beginning, and the official documents, etc., use that word all the time. In 1948, it changed because the policy that tried to impose English as the official language in Puerto Rico, that was the official policy of the US, changed. And then we were able to change the name to Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, we call it all the time Puerto Rico. No, but in the documents related to the US, to the federal government, etc., they use Puerto Rico until that time.
So interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, now
go ahead.
Let me see.
Desde que nacimos, nuestra mancha de plátano salió del mismo racimo. Somos hermanos del mismo horizonte, todos nos criamos en la falda del monte. Crecimos pero para que otros se aprovechen. Somos un pueblo con dientes de leche, los hijos del trabajo sin merienda. La limonada para el capataz de la hacienda, todo lo que sobrevive. Somos la caña fermentada del Caribe, pero aunque la historia nos azota, somos como una botella de vidrio que flota. La central Aguirre la pusimos a producir, sin saber leer ni escribir. Y la depresión la curamos sin jarabe, porque caminamos al compás de la clave. Nuestra raza por naturaleza es brava, salimos de la tapa de un volcán con lava. No hay identidad, dicen algunos, pero aquí todos llevamos en la espalda el número 20.
Okay, I just want to share part of the video. I can send Luis the presentation, and if you want to see the video, the name is Hijos del Cañaveral. You can find it in YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco, very much. Okay, so I think we're done. So thanks everyone for your participation. And again, as soon as we have the information, we will share it with you. And remember that the webinar has been recorded too for your future reference. Thanks, Raina. Thanks, David. Thanks, Francisco. And have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Francisco.